Today's scripture begins with Joel 2:28 through 29. God's Spirit poured out. Then afterward, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves in those days, I will pour out my Spirit. 1 Corinthians 14:33 through 35. As in all the churches of the saints, women should be silent in the churches. For they are not permitted to speak, but should be subordinate, as the law also says. If there is anything they desire to know, let them ask their husbands at home. For it is shameful for a woman to speak in church.
So let us pray. O divine wisdom, just as you inspired the mothers of our faith, grant us your knowledge and discernment so that we can learn how to be generous in our compassion and courageous in our faith. Through Christ and in the Spirit. Amen. Well, in this Easter season, we're sharing resurrection stories of biblical characters, historical characters, and our own stories too. Today, as you know, it's Mother's Day, a day in the United States that has some of its roots in an action calling mothers to unite in promoting world peace. So I thought that we'd look today at Anna Howard Shaw, a woman who was never a mother herself, but was a strong woman of faith who nurtured and encouraged so many and left a strong legacy for us. Anna, like many Christians who've come before and after her, did not believe that Paul's words stood for all time. They were words speaking into particular circumstances in Paul's time. God uses and values men and women equally. God's Spirit is poured out on us all, as we heard in the reading from the prophet Joel. So Anna Howard Shaw, she was born in 1847 and she died at age 72 in 1919. She was the first ordained clergywoman in the Methodist Protestant Church. She was a doctor of medicine. She was a suffrage orator and social reformer. She was a feminist opposed to war. And she was an author. She wrote her own autobiography called The Story of a Pioneer. And that's now available free on the internet. It's a fascinating read. And it's where all these quotes come from. So I encourage you to take a look for that too. Well, on her father's side of the family, there was some distant Scottish ancestry. They were known as the Shaws of Rothiemurchus, living at Loch an Island in the northern highlands of Scotland. Loch an Island, meaning Lake of the Island, had a castle on it. And in the 1700s, long before she was born, it fell to the Grants, and the Shaw family scattered, some including Anna's grandfather, to England. On her mother's side of the family, they came from Alnwick in Northumberland. Her grandfather drove the Royal Mail stagecoach to and from Newcastle, about 35 miles away. And he died in an accident. And Anna's grandmother was given a position in the castle of the Duke of Northumberland at Alnwick. Anna's mother was then educated in the school of the Duchess. Her grandmother was a Unitarian who refused to pay the tithe or the tax to the Church of England. There used to be assessed tithes on every pane of glass in a window. Remember how small those windows were too. A portion of the money collected went to the support of the church. So year after year, Anna's intrepid grandmother refused to pay these assessments. And year after year, she sat pensively on her doorstep, watching articles of furniture being sold for money in order to pay her tithes. She never won her fight, but she never abandoned it either. And she was a woman who spent all her leisure time in the homes of the very poor, mending their clothing and teaching them to sew. And so Anna's grandmother was quite the influence on her. In 1835, Thomas Shaw, her father, and Nicholas Stott, her mother, met in Alnwick, and they married and they went on to have 8 children. Anna was the 6th. She was born in 1847 in Newcastle. 2 years later, her father set sail to America on his own. 2 years later, 1851, he sent for her mother and Anna and her siblings to go to America. Anna says, "I was then a little more than 4 years old, and the first vivid memory I have is that of being shipboard and having a mighty wave roll over me. I was lying on what seemed to be an enormous red box under a hatchway, and the water poured from above, almost drowning me." Well, the ship got disabled in the storm and had to return to England and then set out again. They set out on another ship. They landed in America, and their father was not there to meet them. He had heard that this new ship had been lost at sea. So finally they had a joyous reunion, and they settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts. A year later they moved north to Lawrence, Massachusetts, and stayed there for 7 years. Years in Lawrence, she says, were interesting and formative ones. She discovered her father hiding escaped slaves, and that led to her interest in the abolition movement. And then she said she made a friend, an adult friend. Living next door to us, she says, was a beautiful and mysterious woman. All we children knew of her was that she was a vivid and romantic figure who seemed to have no friends, and of whom our elders spoke in whispers, or not at all. To me, she was a princess in a fairy tale, for she rode a white horse and wore a blue velvet riding habit with a velvet hat and a picturesquely drooping white plume. One day, the woman handed Anna a note to give to her mother, asking Anna's mother if Anna could come to tea. Anna later found out it ended with the words, "She will see no one but me. No harm shall come to her. Trust me." Well, Anna's parents discussed it and decided to let her go, and Anna formed this unlikely friendship with this woman of the town. The friendship broke up only when they moved. Anna said, "I've never forgotten her, and whenever in my later work I've been able to help women of the class to which she belonged, I have mentally offered that help for credit in the tragic ledger of her life, in which the clean and blotted pages were so strange a contrast. The memory of her in after years and the impression she had made on my susceptible young mind led me first into the ministry, next into medicine, and finally into suffrage work." Well, in 1859, her father got the idea that they were going to move west to the frontier, to Michigan, to the northern forests. Her father and her older brother James went out first, and a few months later her father returned to Lawrence and then sent the family out. He stayed in Lawrence. The train took them to Grand Rapids, and then they had to go the last 100 miles by wagon. She said, "We made the last stage of our journey, our hearts filled with the joy of nearing our new home. We had all had an idea that we were going to a farm, and we expected some resemblance at least to the prosperous farms we'd seen in New England. What we found awaiting us were the 4 walls and the roof of a good-sized log house, standing in a small cleared strip of the wilderness, its doors and windows represented by square holes, its floor also a thing of the future, its whole effect achingly forlorn and desolate. Our little world had crumbled under our feet. Never before had we seen our mother give way to despair." Well, they spent 18 months there without her father. They found a nearby creek which they would get water from, although that was difficult when it iced over in the winter. They put in the windows and the doors, they laid the flooring, They ate some wild fruit. They learned to fish and cut trees. The older brother James got sick after a few months, and they spent the remainder of the following year still on their own. There was no school. They had the books that they brought with them and the newspaper that their father used to send them. And she was age 12. At age 13, a school did open, but she knew more than the teacher, and so she studied at home. At age 14, her father had joined them by that time. She said, "I had begun to feel the call of my career. For some reason, I wanted to preach, to talk to people, to tell them things. Just why, just what, I didn't yet know. But I'd begun to preach in the silent woods, to stand on the stumps and address the unresponsive trees, to feel the stir of aspiration within me." She told her father, "Someday I am going to college." So far as I knew, she said, no woman had gone to college. But now that I put my secret hopes into words, I was desperately determined to make those hopes come true. At 15, she became a school teacher, working for $2 a week. And then her fathers and brothers went off to fight in the Civil War, and Anna was the principal support for her family. She had a sister who died in childbirth, another who married and moved away to Big Rapids. She said, "I had no time to dream my dream, but the star of my one purpose still glowed in my dark horizon. I never lost faith that in some manner the miracle would come to pass. As certainly as I've ever known anything, I knew that I was going to college." The war ended, her brothers and her father came back, and she was able to move to Big Rapids to live with her sister and go and learn a trade. But then, the university's pastor, Mariana Thompson, came and preached. She said, "It was a wonderful moment when I saw my first woman minister enter her pulpit. And as I listened to her sermon, thrilled to the soul, all my early aspirations to become a minister myself stirred in me with cumulative force. After the services, I hung for a time on the fringe of the group that surrounded her, and at last, when she was alone and about to leave, I found the courage to introduce myself and pour forth the tale of my ambition. Her advice was as prompt as if she'd studied my problem for years. 'My child,' she said, 'give up your foolish idea of learning a trade and go to school. You can't do anything until you've got an education. Get it, and get it now.' So Anna went to Big Rapids High School, and she was soon involved in speech and debate. At her first recitation, though, she fainted. 10 minutes later, though, she said she got up and she went back and she succeeded. And she said that that nervousness stayed with her all her life, but she never again fainted. Well, then they had a Methodist pastor who came to town, a Dr. Peck, a man of progressive ideas for his time. And there was a movement afoot to license women to preach in the Methodist Church, and Dr. Peck was ambitious to be the first presiding elder to have a woman ordained for the Methodist ministry. And he had heard about Anna, and he offered her a chance to preach. "Why," she stammered, "I can't preach a sermon." And Dr. Peck smiled at her and said, "Have you ever tried?" "Never," I said, "to human beings." And Dr. Peck smiled again and said to her, "Well, the door is open. Enter or not as you wish." After she gave her first sermon, she was then invited to preach in Dr. Peck's circuit of 26 churches, and then to apply for her license to preach, which she was awarded the following year. She was facing many doubts, though, and some family rejection who didn't think this was the path she should be taking. And then a woman lecturer, Mary Livermore, came to town, and Mary encouraged her. "My dear," she said quietly, "if you want to preach, go on and preach. Don't let anybody stop you. No matter what people say, don't let them stop you." And her words were a tonic to Anna, and it was a shield from the criticisms that the world was hurling at her. And so at age 26, she went to Albion College in Michigan. And soon, when she was there, she plunged into public speaking. And there was a men's society, a women's society, and a men and women's society there. And she wasn't quite sure whether she was going to join the women's society or the mixed one. And then she was told by one of the men there that women needed to be associated with men to manage meetings. At which point she made up her mind she was joining the women's group. She also discovered that when there was an advantage of any kind to be secured, that the men invariably got it. And so when there was going to be a union, it was the men who got to choose the person who was going to speak to be the orator. And so they put forward a man's name. And the women who weren't allowed to do this decided they were going to put forward a woman's name. And Anna was put forward. The men, of course, voted against it, but the women ended up outnumbering them. And Anna ended up being the speaker for the reunion. Over time, she was invited to give a series of lectures on temperance. She spent the summer preaching, and that helped pay her fees, and eventually her health improved. She said she had some hair-raising journeys to some of her preaching destinations. And if you read her autobiography, you can read about some of them, including how she had to use her revolver for protection. In 1876, she was 29, she went to theological school at Boston University. She took a chance because she didn't know how to fund it. She didn't know anyone who lived in that area. She was the only woman among 42 men. She started cold and hungry and lonely. Eventually, she was asked to preach at a revival. She decided that would determine her fate. If she earned enough money there to go on, she would, otherwise she would give up. It was a successful week and she got complimented on her preaching, but given no money. And as she was walking back in the street, a woman approached to her who had been so touched, and gave her $5. Anna said, "It's the biggest gift I've ever had. This little bill is big enough to carry my future on its back." She had a good meal that night and bought shoes the next morning, but infinitely more sustaining than the food was the conviction that the Lord had given her a sign of God's approval. Later that summer, she met Persis Addy, a widow, who then ended up living with her for 2 happy years. She said, "It's the first time I had someone to come home to, someone to confide in, someone to talk to listen and to love." And during that time, she got appointed, while she was still at college, at theological school, to Hingham, Massachusetts. Persis Addy then died, and when she graduated, she wasn't reappointed to Hingham, even though it had grown 4 times the size while she was there. She was sent to the Methodist Episcopal Church at East Dennis in Cape Cod in 1878. And it was a church experiencing a lot of conflict. And so she was shepherd of a divided flock. But she succeeded in bringing them together in harmony. And the following year, they added another church, a congregational church. So she had 2 churches there in Cape Cod. 2 years after that, in 1880, she applied for ordination with the Methodist Episcopal Church, along with another woman, another Anna Oliver. Now, there were a large number of truly good and holy, sincere men who strongly believed that women were out of place in the ministry. And Anna Oliver and Anna Shaw were both examined, they both passed, but when the vote came, they were both refused their ordination. The bishop told them to get out of the church. Anna Oliver decided to stay and fight. Anna Shaw said, "I don't intend to fight my church, but I am called to preach the gospel, and if I can't preach it in my own church, I'll preach it in some other church." They both appealed the decision, though, and they were refused once more. And on top of that, it went worse because they lost their license to preach as well. But Anna immediately got an invitation and was invited to apply for ordination in the Methodist Protestant Church. During those conferences, they present the candidates, and then the candidates have to retire whilst the other pastors get to vote on them. That still happens even today. When Anna's name came up, she was asked to leave, as her predecessors had been. Normally it's just for a few moments. She went into the anteroom and waited. Half an hour, all afternoon, all evening, and still the battle raged. Eventually, someone pointed out that she wasn't a member of the Methodist Protestant Church. She was a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And so they denied her on a technicality. The next day, they ordained all the men, but she became a member. And so her case came up again on the Monday, and there was another all-day discussion with lots of theological arguments. And eventually, they voted to approve her. And so she was ordained on Tuesday, October the 12th, 1880. While she was working at the church, remember she'd finished her theological degree by this time, she decided that she still didn't have enough to do, and she started at Boston University to become a doctor, a medical doctor. And she started lecturing for the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association. She practiced medicine in the Boston slums, and at age 38 she graduated with her Doctor of Medicine. And at that point, she decided that she wasn't going to go into medicine and she wasn't going to have the church anymore. She resigned from the church because what she really wanted to do was be a speaker and to try and change things. And so she ended up as a lecturer with the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association. She went on lecture tours talking about suffrage and temperance and had a grueling schedule. She became head of the franchise department of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. But by age 41, she was persuaded by Susan B. Anthony, who was 27 years older than her and a mentor, to concentrate on one thing. And she dropped the temperance movement and became part of the suffrage movement. She was vice president of the National American Women's Suffragette Association. She had lots of travel, some of it international, and had lots of adventures. Age 57 in 1904, she became president of the National American Women's Suffragette Association and remained there for 11 years until she was age 68. Her administration was marked by unprecedented progress. The number of suffrage workers increased from 17,000 to 200,000. One campaign every 10 years was replaced by 10 campaigns in 1 year. The expenditures of the association increased from 15,000 to 50,000 annually, and the number of states which passed full suffrage grew from 4 to 12, and the whole suffrage movement changed from an academic discussion to a vital political force arousing the attention of the entire nation. And during that time she was still preaching, she just wasn't a pastor of a church. From 1917 to 1919, she was age 70 by this time, 70 to 72 age. She was the chairperson of the Women's Committee of the Council of National Defence. World War I was going on. She established 18,000 units or branches of women's defence workers, and she received the Distinguished Service Medal for her role in the war effort. And she died not long after that. And so, we remember her. We remember her as a Methodist. We remember her as an example of a strong woman of faith, living out a calling for justice in the world. She saw the suffrage cause as fundamentally religious, that women needed a vote to protect their home and against exploitation at work, and that God operated by sending visions to reformers. And she came from those beginnings on the frontier and experienced resurrection in her own life many times. As Easter people, we give thanks for the resurrected life that Anna experienced, never losing sight of her goal in the hard, dispiriting times. How she worked through her nervousness and fear about speaking, for her willingness to take a stand again and again and again. And for those who were her mentors, for those who gave that appreciative word to her when she was feeling so low, and those who gave financial support. You never know what difference you are making in the life of another, and how that might be resurrection in their own lives. Anna moved in the power of God's Spirit, walked in the light of God's presence, and danced to the beat of God's heart as she loved others with a heart of compassion. We give thanks for the lessons from her ministry and witness. May it inspire us to keep going when the times are tough, to be ever willing to take a stand, to mentor and to have a kind word to those in the generations that follow on behind us. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us pray together. God of resurrections and new beginnings, we give thanks for the lives of the saints of the past and all they can teach us. Transform us into the new creation that you're calling us to be. Help us to inspire others, to nurture them, to offer a kind word of encouragement, to give a blessing, to be all that you call us to be. In Jesus' name we pray.